Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Living Local Lombard. We are here in 2021. It is a new year, and we are emerging from the pandemic. I'm your host, Aaron Carlson, and joining me today is Rae Slowik, who is the education coordinator at the Lombard Historical Society, which many of you have been to their events, you've bought their merchandise, you've learned interesting, crazy facts about Lombard. And really, they are really entrenched in the community. And I was thinking Lilac Time is coming up, so why not talk about the Historical Society and talk a little bit about Lombard? So Rae, thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. I'm excited to be here.
So first and foremost, as the resident expert here at the Historical Society, tell me a little bit about yourself, and a little bit about what you do specifically for the society.
Absolutely. So my role, as Aaron said, is the education coordinator. So I am responsible for managing all of our school programs, our scout programs, family programs, as well as helping create a lot of the educational materials that go around with any exhibits we put up. I help do programming for those. As well as I assist just in how we make exhibits, staffing the museum, as well as I manage our volunteers. So lots of different hats, lots of really fun days here. And the Historical Society, we're really the keepers of Lombard history. So we preserve, promote, and interpret all of the amazing things that have and in the future will happen here in Lombard.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit more about the society. Because I feel like everybody kind of knows, like you can get a basic understanding from the name, but like really at the end of the day, what is it that the Historical Society does, and like what is the days like in and out, like what does that all look like?
Yeah, so historical societies in general are a specific type of museums that really focus on local history. So while we look, at some of the national trends that happen, we really connected back to what was specifically happening in our town at that time, and really getting those kind of intimate stories that you don't always see when you go to some of the larger museums. We take care of a lot of historical artifacts. So if people we have dresses from the 1900s and the 1800s, we have some of the silverware that people have used in the past, as well as we tell the stories of those things as well. So when people donate an object to us, we like to sit and talk with them about what it is that makes this object unique and why it's important to make sure that we're preserving it. So that way, when school kids come on field trips, I'm able to, show them this object, for example, like a cheese press from the past, but also I can tell them, this was Harriet Peck's cheese press and, her story going along with that. And so our day in and day out does change. It's never quite the same thing day to day. But really we're just about, taking care of the things that have been entrusted to us by members of the community and their families, and making sure that it's available to share with everyone.
Awesome. And before we talk about some of those specific objects, places, etc., tell me a little history about Lombard. We are how many, like 40, 50,000 residents, right?
Something like that, yeah.
Somewhere in that range. And like when I was on your website, it's literally a whole book of information on our history. And I feel like if I didn't know 95% of it, that most people probably don't. So like, when was Lombard founded? What's the story? How has it evolved, etc.? Tell me all that.
So Lombard, the first people to live in Lombard were the Pecks. So Sheldon and his wife Harriet came to the area that would become Lombard in 1837. Back then, this area was known as Babcock's Grove. There were two brothers, the Babcock's brothers, who lived closer in what today is more Glen Ellen area. And so this kind of area was named after them. And so with Sheldon and Harriet moving into the area, we started seeing a lot more people coming out from Chicago and kind of settling this area. There's lots of good rivers. You had forests not too far away. Prairie land is fertile. So we start seeing more and more of those kind of like early farmers.
Okay.
And especially because we are so close to Chicago. I mean, today it's an easy commute into the city, and it was back then. So the train is going to come to Lombard in about the 1840, end of the 1840s. And that's really going to be something that shapes Lombard's identity.
And back then, would that have been like passenger trains or like purely like stuff?
Those would have been passenger trains.
Okay, like for commuters?
Yeah, so we know that where the train line runs today, that is pretty much the same path that the first train line would have taken back in the 1840s. And it would have been a lot more of a journey. It would not have been like this 30 minutes, express train that we can catch today, but they still would have been able to build that connection. And so we're able to get those supplies. People are able to live out here because even back then there was still this idea that living in a city was dirty and that there was a lot of pollution. And so people wanted to have access to all the things that are incredible about cities, the culture, the jobs, but they didn't necessarily want to raise families there. So we see along the train, we have this the downtown area starts to flourish. We have several dry goods stores. We have the Lombard Hotel, which is where the Babcock's Grove House, that restaurant is today. That building was there. There's several sweet stores, and really Lombard starts to kind of, flourish as this bedroom community. At one point, we were far enough from the city that this would be kind of weekend country. So you would come out here and enjoy your weekends out in the country.
Interesting.
Yeah. We're not, the city itself is going to be incorporated in 1869. And that's when we're going to change the name from Babcock's Grove to Lombard. Back then, in order to get some of the tax breaks and really be seen as a town, you needed to incorporate. And that took a little bit of skill and knowledge because you just have to navigate the legal system, which is, has its own challenges then and its own challenges today. And so they contacted this guy, Josiah Lombard, and he created the plat, which is kind of that old fashioned map that you'll see a lot of times on our website. We have it on shirts in our gift shop.
Yeah.
And that just pretty much outlines the boundary of the city. And they were so grateful that he created this for us that we named the town after him. Which is really funny because he never spent a night in this town. So so
of course.
Our town gets its name from the man who created a map for us.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
So, and we had, at that time we had some pretty influential, people living in this town. It's right around the 1860s is when Colonel Plum and his wife, Helen, moved here. We have General Benjamin Sweet is living in town. And General Sweet is actually going to be one of the people who helps write our town charter, which it creates the loophole for women to be able to vote in Lombard about 29 years before the amendment is passed. And the reason they do that is General Sweet's daughters were very strong-willed women. They have some great stories of their own. And so he wrote in the town charter, all citizens have the right to vote, and women were obviously citizens. And so Ellen Martin, who was a female lawyer, created this incredible brief, brought it to the election judges and said, here is my 300-page legal brief, or you can just let me vote. And so she voted, and then she brought back 14 other women with her, and they all voted. And that's part of that is because she found that legal loophole. And they were the first women to vote in the state of Illinois. So that's a really cool piece of Lombard history that we're able to highlight. We have a historical marker for her out front.
I didn't know that.
We don't know the actual voting place, but we know where a lot of these women lived. And so the Historical Society, the Victorian Cottage, is kind of central to all of their homes. Many of them attended First Church of Lombard, which is Maple Street Chapel today. And so it made sense to kind of put it in this central location. And from there, we just see Lombard, really growing into its identity as, kind of the Lilac Village. Obviously, we celebrate Lilac Time every year, and we just continue to be a place that has really good connections to city and really good community roots.
Okay, 2 follow-up questions that I thought of. So, okay, these are random, but so you mentioned the railroad. And this might just be a childhood rumor or something I made up in my head. Do the Prairie Path and the Great Western Trail have anything to do with the railroad?
They do. They both used to be railroad tracks. So the Prairie Path was the Elgin, Aurora, Chicago, or Chicago, Aurora, Elgin. I forget the order of the words there, unfortunately. But that was a strictly commuter path that was there, and that was really to just bring people in and out of the city. And then as well as connect people to some of the farther out suburbs. And then the Great Western Trail was the Northwestern, I believe, branch. So we had 3 railroad tracks within like 10 blocks of each other. And so if you can imagine, that would have been quite a lot of traffic. So eventually, the other 2 train stations do get disbanded, and then as part of the Rails to Trails program that we have in this state, they get turned into the trails that we know today.
Fascinating. And then my other question, okay, there might be a for sure answer. This might be public opinion. Is it Lombard or Lombard?
It is Lombard. So
Lombard,
because there is a Lombard family who lived in here, which was Lumbard. So they are a different family who they are not who the town is named for, and I forget exactly what they did, but I know that there is that they have a different spelling as well. Yes.
Fascinating. Wow. Okay. I need to be careful about how I say it.
I think it goes back and forth. No one's gonna.
No judgment.
Yeah.
All right. So tell me, you mentioned a couple of the properties that you oversee, like the Victorian Cottage and the Peck Homestead. Tell me about a couple of the properties and like what they are and like the people behind them.
Yeah, so the first one I'll talk about is the Sheldon Peck Homestead. That is located at 355 East Parkside, just across from right at the corner of Grace Street there. And that is the oldest house in Lombard. That house was built in 1839, and that was built by Sheldon and Harriet. A lot of older residents might remember in the 90s, we lowered the roof line back to what it would have looked like when Sheldon and Harriet lived in there. But that house has only ever been owned by the Peck family and the Historical Society.
Oh, wow.
So we're able to tell some really cool stories about what early life would have been like for the settlers in this area, because the Pecks were the very first residents of our town. But Sheldon Peck was a folk artist, so we're able to bring in what folk art is, as well as a radical abolitionist. So we know that that was part of the Underground Railroad, that Harriet and Sheldon both housed enslaved people seeking freedom. And we're able to really have these important conversations of not only what was happening in the 1840s and beyond in our country, but also how that has impacted our country today. And really be able to share that history. Because so many people, especially, as we live up here in, kind of Northern Illinois, we, tend to, at least when I was going through school, think of the Civil War as the thing that happened, in the South. Like, we talk about Illinois, being a part of it and sending troops, but it doesn't always seem like it affected us up here. And so we're able to talk about how it truly had an impact on the people who lived up there, and how it's not necessarily as cut and dry as North versus South, because there were definitely people in Illinois who did support the institution of slavery, unfortunately. And so we're able to, teach kids some of those nuances and share some of that story here.
Awesome. And then what about the Victorian Cottage?
Yeah, so that is where I am today. I've got I'm in our back parlor. which is located at 23 West Maple Street, just across the street from the library in Lilac Park. And so this house was built in 1883 by Newell Madston, kind of as a renter's home, and eventually was owned by George and Annie Hill. And this shows us what Lombard would have looked like kind of at the turn of the century, as it's transitioning away from a lot of farming to more of that kind of bedroom commuting identity. And so we look at a lot of that transitionary pieces. We also at this site have our carriage house, which houses our collection as well as our long-term exhibit and our pop-up or our rotating exhibits. Really exciting is that we did just receive a $750,000 grant from the state of Illinois to do construction on our carriage house. So we're going to add about 1,800 square feet to that building and really be able to just serve the community of Lombard even more. So we're really excited about that. As well as at this site, we have our Lilac Emporium gift shop. So we really, we host concerts here in the summer. And we really use this to show what Lombard kind of looked like in the past.
Congratulations on the grant. That's always good news.
Yeah.
You mentioned lilac. Can you talk a little bit about Lilac Time? I know it's coming up. Talk a little bit about like the history of it and like why we are the Lilac Village, and then what you all do specifically during Lilac Time.
Absolutely, yeah. So Lilac Time is kind of the first 2 weeks of May. And it does seem like it's a really kind of strange thing to be the Lilac Village, you know, that it doesn't necessarily make sense. But Colonel Plum, he was a telegraph operator during during the Civil War. And he and his wife, Helen, moved to the city of Chicago after the war, and he was looking for a place to live. And he decided that a 30-minute commute was acceptable from the city of Chicago. And so he got on a train, started his stopwatch, and Lombard was, you know, about 30 minutes. He got off and saw this beautiful property that was actually being sold. And that was where Lilac Park is today. So he ends up buying this property. And he doesn't tell his wife that he's buying this property before he does it. So she moves in sight unseen. And they end up, you know, buying the house, living there. And then they go on a European tour. And during that time, they stop in kind of the, eastern part of France. And they go to a nursery and they see the lilacs that are there. And it's funny because Colonel Plum was kind of hesitant to actually go into this nursery. And so it was really his wife, Helen, who like pushed him in that we're going to go here. And they saw a couple of French varieties of lilacs, and we have examples of them in the park today. The Michel Bouchner and Mademoiselle Casimir. And they brought these back with them, planted them in their yard, and thus began a lifelong passion for really the two of them with lilacs. And Colonel Plum really took it a step above. So it wasn't like he just had 2 or 3 lilacs like you might think of like in a normal person's yard. At the highest count, he had 1,200 lilacs in his yard.
Wow.
Yeah, like of all different varieties.
Very fragrant.
Yeah, it was very much so a hobby of passion. His yard used to be set up more so like a nursery. So it would have just been straight rows of these lilac bushes. And eventually his wife does pass away, and then a few years later he passes away, and they don't have any children, so they donate the land to become the first public park in Lombard. So that would have been in 1927 is when Colonel Plum died, and it starts kind of this transition from being a very nursery type private home into the Lilac Park that we know today. We actually get the name Lilac from Colonel Plum. That's what he named his estate. It's a Latin derivative of the word lilac. And the city contacts Jens Jensen, who is a contemporary of Frank Lloyd Wright, and really kind of seen as bringing in that prairie style into outdoor nature. So it's a push, like the way the park is designed is a pushback from the very like straight rows of Victorian style gardens to really embracing kind of nature back into the park. And so that's why you'll see we still have a couple of flagstone paths in the park today. Some of the flagstone benches are still visible. And so it's that really kind of meeting of nature with human construction is really the goal of Lilacia Park. And so the park opened in 1930, and that was the very first lilac time. So we've had the Lilac Festival this is the 91st year. So it's really been a Lombard tradition for a very long time. In the early days, they always had the lilac court. So there was always a lilac queen and lilac princesses. In the past, it was really more so of a popularity contest. Adeline Fleege was the very first lilac queen. And back then you had to pay to vote. And the ballots were, I think, like a penny a piece. But the Fleeges owned a dry goods store here in town. And so her father actually paid for people to be able to vote for his daughter. Oh
no.
But Adeline was from all accounts that in stories we've heard, she was very deserving of it still, that she was a very gracious woman as well, but definitely had some help from her dad in
getting only in Illinois.
Yeah. Today it is an academic scholarship contest. So they really focus on the community service that the girls who are coming up are participating in, as well as their academics. So it has grown through time, and it's a really fun tradition that we still have. And we've gotten away from some of the pageantry of the earlier lilac times. They used to have like actual pageants where they would have up to 300 people participating in a play kind of in that top stage area that's above the fountain. And it's incredible because the women of Lombard would donate their times to create these beautiful costumes. And it's really interesting to have that as a foil against what's happening in our nation, because we have to remember the 1930s, especially in the early 1930s, that's the midst of the Great Depression. So these women are, donating time and things that they may not really have to create this beautiful experience for people, both in Lombard, and we would draw crowds from all around the area. Yeah.
So, okay, today and this month, Lilac Time.
Yes.
What are you all specifically offering? What's your role? How does it look with COVID?
Yes, so we do heritage tours. So we do offer tours of Lilacia Park. You can register on our website. They ahead of time. We unfortunately, because of COVID, we're not taking any walk-ups this year, but we share the history of the park. We share a little bit of information about the botanical side of lilacs. We work fairly closely with the park district to get some really good information about where each lilac plant is, its kind of variety. And then as well as sharing more information about the history of lilac time, the history of the plums, and really that why lilacs in Lombard kind of idea. And then we also have our gift shop is open also every day, and we have a lot of lilac time themed items in there as well as just Lombard themed items.
I have seen the pictures and I'm like, oh, my wallet. I want it all.
Yes.
All right. Anything else that you want to share or highlight or shout out?
I would say I think the last thing that I'll talk about, is kind of that is a really great story about how Lombardians really come together. And so we are the caretakers of the very first Lilac Crown. It was created by Christy Reed. She was an artist who had a studio in Chicago. And she lived in a house just next door to the Historical Society. And she was really well known, and we're very glad to be able to have this piece of Lombard history. But my favorite thing about it is that the silver used to create it was donated by, the women of Lombard took their silver spoons, donated them, and had them melted down. Exactly. And once again, this is in the Great Depression. And so selling that silver sometimes means that you can, for some of them, it might be meaning getting food or not. So the fact that they were willing to donate the silver to this incredible art piece that has a lasting legacy in Lombard. We still to this day, when they do the tiara presentation, we bring that crown out and we let each girl who's part of the court take a picture wearing the original lilac crown. So they have that piece of history with them. And that's probably the best part about being the Historical Society, is really connecting Lombardians to their past. So even if you haven't been, you may not have, been part of the families that were here at the very beginning, but we all still share this connection to Lombard history and to our community. So it's really great.
Yeah, that's what I love about Lombard, is you have people that have been here for several generations, and then you have people that want to come raise a family, people that come and go, young people, like it's a great mix, great location, great community vibe. And I'm glad that you guys are preserving it and keeping the stories alive. It's very magical.
It really is. And so we are constantly doing something new. So in addition to Lilac Time, we have concerts during the summer. We'll have our Art at the Pack series, which is for families where they can come and they'll make a craft at the Sheldon Pack Homestead. We're going to do bonfire nights this summer. Later this month in May, we're going to have some living history people, some Union soldiers come out and share some more of the Civil War history. And then in June, we'll have a bridal exhibit featuring some of the wedding dresses from our collection. So there's always something interesting going on with the Historical Society.
Yes, I love it. Well, Rae, I will make sure to put all the links to your website and your events in the bio to this video. And thank you so very much for coming on and for featuring your awesome backdrop. You look like you're in like a game of Clue right now.
Sometimes it definitely feels that. You'll see that most Victorian homes are definitely, how many small rooms can I have in my So
small rooms with lots of objects.
Yes, small rooms with as many knickknacks as I can put on the shelf. It's a way to show off their wealth, and very different from our ideals today.
I love it. Well, Rae, thank you again so much, and good luck with Lilac Time, and have fun and stay healthy, and keep doing amazing work over there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today.